Talking about today? Today we are talking about getting data from a web API. Today we're talking about getting data from a web API. How does our app talk to a web API? How do we get a data? How do we get data from, example, a Foursquare API, a Yelp API, a Google Maps API? How do we get that data into our application? That's what we're talking about today. And the class, the foundation class that we need is called URLSession. URLSession allows us to make requests from a web API, download data into our app, and later next week, we'll start seeing how to get data from our app, push it to a web API. So today, what we'll be seeing is get request, get data from a web service into our application. We'll create an app using one of the APIs you had yesterday, but instead of copy pasting the JSON, we'll be using the URL directly and URLSession to get that API data into my app, right? So URLSession is the class for that. What does URLSession do? Here it says an object that coordinates a group of related network data transfer tasks. What does that really mean? Again, as I said before, URLSession talks to a web API. Either it gets data or it could post data. It could do any of the HTTP methods that we spoke about at the intro of Unit 3. We spoke about HTTP methods. We spoke about get, we spoke about post, we spoke about put, update, delete. All those post methods we could do, all those HTTP methods we could do via URLSession. Today, what we'll be using is a get request, right? That's what we'll be using today. Again, URLSession is a big framework. There's a lot of things going on in URLSession. But today, we'll just scratch the surface with what we could do with URLSession. We'll use URLSession with an endpoint URL to get data from the Jokes API, okay? So no longer are we using like a .json file in our application. That skill is very useful. Still know it, still be able to do it. But today we'll start seeing how to get an endpoint we have, use that endpoint, get real-time data into our app. Okay? This is what we're gonna do today. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a new project. What's that, Mr. Eric? A new project. Mr. Eric, what's happening? Talking smack. Okay, single view application. Next, as I said, we'll be using the Jokes API. So we'll call this Jokes, simply Jokes. Language Swift, UI storyboard, unit testing, yes. Core data, not today. UI testing, different day. Cool? Okay, let's move on. Save it on my desktop. This is good, 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 good. Come on. I need my 8 cores. Where's my 8 cores? Okay. You see what I'm saying? What file you don't want to open? Crazy. Okay, so we have our test. Let's go to our test. Let me make this bigger. We'll first get some JSON and make a test before we go into URLSession talk. So let's get into our test here. So go to your Jokes test, remove all the stubs. We don't need any of those override functions for now. What we do need is a test to test for jokes, right? The joke model. Let me get the endpoint we'll be using and Slack it to everybody. Exactly, but some people might not have it, so I don't want to assume anything. Have we been creating collections, by the way? I showed us yesterday. Have we been creating collections? Collections enables me to do this, right? I'm able to go to my Jokes API. It's a collection in Postman, as opposed to going through many endpoints, which I don't know what it is. I simply go to, again, organization is the key, right? The better anything, your room, whatever it is, the better it's organized, the quicker you get information that you're looking for. So here I have my jokes collection. If you want more help with creating collections, you could catch me offline. But here I have my jokes API, and it's programming jokes, and it's part of my collections. And my collections goes with me anyway. It's a browser. Postman is a browser. I log in. I have my collections everywhere. So all APIs I come across, I create a collection for it, and I'm good. So here, this is the endpoint we're after. And just to review what Postman does, we have our HTTP method. Get is a HTTP method. It allows us to get information from a web service. Yes?
I don't know, maybe when all right, from what we have, the endpoint, the first endpoint, when I click on that endpoint, it doesn't take me to where I would get URL.
I'll send out the URL. I'm just going to Slack out.
My question is that, where do you find the URL? Because when I click on it, it just gives me.
You copy it. You just copy the URL. Wow, that's wow. So excited. Okay, I slacked out the endpoint URL. I slacked out the endpoint URL. You don't click on it, you copy it. You copy it, you go to Postman, you paste it in. You copy the URL, you go to Postman, you paste it into this browser link there, and you click on send when you're ready. Everybody's doing that, right? Yes? And again, Postman has all the HTTP methods. Here we have get, post, put, all of them. All of them are here. The main ones we need to know for Unit 3 is get, post. Those are the two big ones. Especially posting. Posting has a bit more work in there. We'll talk about posting. We might start talking about posting earlier than we have on the calendar, just because there's so much more involved there. But getting is very easy. Getting is straightforward. You have a URL. You use URLSession, you're done. But posting, there's more packaging to do. Yes?
How come it is, though, that in a URL like that, like at the back of it, it says /10. If I was to delete 10 and put 20, it would bring me 20, no?
It depends on what the API gives you, right? You have to look at the API documentation to see what's allowed. You can just put in anything you want.
True, but I know that I've done it, like, sometimes it says equals 6, right?
It depends on what the API documentation says, right? At the end of it, you have to just see what the API documentation says. If it says you could take 10, maybe it's by increments. Maybe it's 10, 20, 30, 40, whatever it is, right? Okay, is everybody Postman working? Yes? Confirmation? Okay, so what are we doing here? We have a GET request. We have an endpoint URL, everybody. What I select into the channel is an endpoint URL. It hits a RESTful API. At this point, we should know what RESTful APIs are. It's an architecture that allows us to do HTTP methods on it. Basically, that's what you need to tell your interviewer if they ask you what RESTful APIs are. And that's one of the things that's on the interview, the job descriptions.
Allows you to do what?
Allows you to perform HTTP methods on a web API. Cool. And I did mention GraphQL. We don't care about GraphQL for now, but just know it exists, and it's a more modern way to get data. But right now, what are we using is RESTful APIs. We make our queries to RESTful APIs. And RESTful APIs is an architecture that's modeled working with HTTP methods, such as get, post, and so on. And an endpoint is, for example, we have an endpoint here that hits the jokes API and gets us back 10 jokes related to programming. That's an endpoint. Okay? That's an endpoint. The URL we paste in, that's called an endpoint. It hits an endpoint on the RESTful API. And the HTTP method we're performing, it's a get method. We're getting information. And by default in Postman, that's what we get. That's what we have, a get. And posting, again, posting is sending data up to a web API. So if I change this to post here, I'm sending data to Instagram. I'm sending data to Facebook. I'm saying I like somebody's post. Anytime you do an activity, you post in some data to a web API, okay? When you're consuming, you're getting information. This is the tool we need for Unit 3. Get and post. That's it. Okay. So make sure that we all have data. We have data. Our top level is an array, correct? Yes, do we agree? So let's just go ahead and copy. I'm going to go ahead and copy the first two jokes here. I'll copy the first two jokes. So from line number 1 to line number 13, I'll go ahead and copy it. Command C, copy. Command C, copy. And I'll go back to my project. I'll create, well, arrange. I'll create some JSON data here. It's a multi-line string. I'll paste in what I just copied from Postman. Please make sure you put a closing square bracket. Please put in a closing square bracket, as I did on line 29. It's an array. It's open at 17. It's closed at 29. Make sure when you double click on that bracket, it does highlight the entire array. Okay, everybody? Everybody? Cool. All right, so let's make this multi-line string. It's a string. Right now, it's not data. I want to make it data. How do I make it data? On that string, I say data, right? Data, and I'm encoding it to UTF-8. And I'm putting an exclamation mark after it. I have to unwrap it. I have data. There's no reason for this to crash. I'm force unwrapping it here. And right now, we have JSON data. That's all we need. So that's the arrange part of our test. Our test will be, can we get 2 objects back? So we'll make a model. Can we get 2 objects back? Okay? So let's keep writing our test. So in our act part of the test, I'll say let jokes here equal to, well, let's wrap this up. Do catch, and here I'll say let jokes equal to try JSON decoder dot decode. What are we expecting? What type is my JSON? What's the root level of my JSON? An array, right? So I'll say array. I do not have a joke model yet, but I know I'll be writing a joke model. And I have my JSON data. Right? So at this point, what is happening to my Xcode? 1 second, right here. At this point, we need to stop writing the test because we have no joke model. We need to go create our joke model. We need to go create our joke model. Can we go create our joke model?
I have a question.
Yes.
Oh, it's because it's in the test.
It's good.
I was going to ask, because when I build it, even though there's an error, it's still building successfully. That's because when you build it, that's for your actual info.
The app, not the
As
test.
opposed to not here.
Okay, so we don't have a joke. Let's go create our joke. Everybody, can we go create a joke model? Yes? Yes, maybe? No? Okay, let's go create a new file. So new file, it's a Swift file. New file is a Swift file. It's called joke. Let's zoom in here. Make sure that your joke is in targets, jokes, and not jokes test, please, everybody. Make sure the new file you created, joke, it's part of the target jokes, not jokes test, everybody. And make sure the group is jokes and not groups jokes test. Everybody? Yes? I'm sorry? No, it's a Swift file. We're creating our model. If we're creating a model, we're creating a Swift file. So click on create. And okay, this 5 pages. Give me a second, let me just restart this. Go ahead and create a struct, call it jokes while I'm restarting my Xcode. Joke, sorry, joke, thank you. So create a Swift file, call it joke. And how many properties does joke have?
Well,
Four.
how many do we need? Because we need the.
Just put in all four. Put in all four for now. Put in all four. Okay, so we have our struct. We call it joke. What are the properties? We have an ID. Is it an int? A string?
Type is a string. No, int is an int. ID is an int.
I'm getting conflict reports here. What's happening, CNN? It's an int. Okay, what else I have?
Type is a string. Setup is a string. Punchline is a string.
Thank you. What am I missing here? Codable, right? But we'll just say decodable. As I said before yesterday, let's get in the habit of breaking them apart for now. Right now, we're only decoding objects. Okay, cool. So we have our joke decodable. We have enough to go back to our test. Let's go back to our test. Okay. I'm back in my test. I have jokes, right? I have a catch here. In my catch statement, if it comes to my catch statement, I'll fail my test with an XCT fail. I don't think we've seen fail yet. So fail basically says it's what it is. It's failed at this point. And here I could just pass in a message. If I fail, then it's a decoding error.
So you use that when you're putting your own person, putting your own JSON data like that.
Yes, like if you have a catch block, you put in a failure block there.
No, I mean when you're, because you usually just do fatal error. But this is another.
Yeah, this is a test, so I'm just going to fail. And here, let's see, what are we testing for? We are testing for XCT assert equal, right? What are we looking for? So jokes count. What should jokes count be? What should jokes count be? 2, right? So let's set that up in our range here. So let expected jokes count equal to 2. And here we'll say expected jokes count, right? So jokes there should be expected jokes created. Okay? So we have enough to test our code now. I'll command you, not command you, but command you. That's my first joke. Question? Tiffany?
If it's, we're saying that it's equal to, so why don't we say expected those count should equal to instead of expected those count, there should be expected. Well, I'm saying we usually equal compare the two numbers in the sentence. I know there's going to be no difference.
We're comparing two different values here. Jokes count is the objects that were created, and the expected, we expect to, right? As far as like what to put into the string, it's up to you here.
Yeah.
Okay, so our test passed, right? Everybody test passed? Right? They passed the bar? Yes? Go back to the struct. Je joke here. That's where you stop. You don't say mine didn't work. You find out what the error is. Right? Developer, developer, developer. So what's the error? What's not working? What does it say? There should be an error. Something. Okay, so that's an error. Something is unresolved. Joke probably doesn't exist on your struct. What do you have? Is it the same name? All those things, right? Somebody says Command B. That might just save your life. What he's saying is sometimes Xcode doesn't propagate the change right away. You have to Command B. Okay. Thank you over there, sir, from Chelsea. Okay. Cool. All right. Everybody, we good? Our model works, right? So first we tested our JSON. It worked. The model works. It correctly decodes my JSON. That's enough for the test for now. Everybody with me? Right? The basic test, we tested our model. Our model works. Okay? We could go to writing more code. I'm not going to introduce asynchronous testing. That's a different type of testing. Asynchronous testing has to do with network testing. The testing we're doing right now is what? Unit tests. Yes, everybody? Unit tests should be fast. Asynchronous test is not fast. Anytime you rely on an external source, your test is no longer as fast as it should be. Everybody with me? I'm hearing whispers. Okay? So, what we're about to do right now is write an API client. We're about to use URLSession. URLSession is not a fast way to test anything. URLSession has to go to the network, fetch data. There's a closure we need to write. There's a scripting closures we need to talk about. That is not fast, okay? We're not gonna write a test for that particular test, for that particular code module, okay? That would be an asynchronous test. Everybody with me? Please. Go back to where? What part is not working for you? Did you put your bracket here? I just want to make sure you put your bracket for your array. Do you have two square brackets? Okay. All right. So I spoke about unit testing. I spoke about the difference between asynchronous test and unit test. Okay. Asynchronous test is a slower test. The more of those tests you have, the slower your test runs. At the end of the day, it doesn't give you that feedback you want. We'll talk about mocking network requests and what that looks like later when we're more comfortable with testing, basic testing. We'll talk about how to test a network. Okay? But for now, we'll not do that today. Today, the big topic is URLSession and how to use it. Everybody with me? Okay? So go ahead and create a new file. Is anybody still in the test, by the way? Can I get out? You gotta get more of those fingers on this guy. More of those fingers. We got 10 fingers. More of those fingers. The typing to the thing works. Have you tried it? Typing tutor. Yeah. Can we Slack out typing tutor in the channel? It actually works, guys. Yeah, just do typing tutor. We only have 4 keys. We have ID, type, setup, and punchline. Did you spell punchline comma case? Yeah, is that what it is? Yeah? Okay, I'm telling you. I got eyes there too. Okay, cool. So let's keep going. We'll create a new file. So Command N. It's a Swift file. Swift file. Okay. And my file name, I'll call it jokes API client. Jokes API client is where my URL session will do the work. URL session will do the work there for me to get me the data from my endpoint. From the Jokes API endpoint, that's where it's going to be. It's a Swift file, yes. Yeah. So at this point, we'll say create. And its foundation, we have a struct. We call it Jokes API client. In that particular struct, we'll have a single function, a single method. It's going to be a type method. We'll call it fetch jokes. Okay. We have our endpoint URL. We'll call it endpoint URL string. It's still a string. We'll go ahead, we'll copy the endpoint URL from our Postman. So make sure you go to Postman. Make sure before you copy that URL, make sure it gets you back JSON. Everybody, don't just copy a URL without validating it gets you JSON. So the URL I'll be copying, the endpoint URL, is the one I have in Postman. And I verify that it works by pressing the send button. It does give back data, right? So when I get to my app, I'm not going to be like, oh, does it get data? Is there data, right? I'm not double guessing here. So I'm going to double click on my URL. I'll copy it. I'll go back to my app. I'll paste it in right here. What are we pasting in? Postman. So far we have an endpoint URL string. We pasted it in from Postman to our app. It's HTTPS, starts with HTTPS, it ends with 10, right? There's no space there. Keep in mind that if you put a space there, it's going to break. We'll talk about URL encoding later, but for now, this is what we have. It's a string, there's no empty spaces on either end. This is our URL string. It's very similar, same thing, same logic. But here, we really officially showing what it is. So all the questions you have, you ask. Cool? All right, so here we'll start off, we'll garden our URL. So we'll say guard that URL. We'll create a URL. We'll create a URL here using the string from above. It's called endpoint URL. Else here. So what are we doing here? We are creating a URL from the given endpoint string above. Okay? So what happens if our URL is bad? Last time we came here, we said a to-do, right? We said to-do. Today we'll to-do the to-do. We'll do it. So what are we going to do here? We're not going to crash the app here. We could put a return here. That's fine. But we want to do more information. We want to do more information gathering. What went wrong? Something went wrong here. It was a bad URL. So we want to tell the user of our API client, hey, you passed in a bad URL. How can we do that? We need to capture it with an enum. We'll capture it with an enum like we saw earlier, right? We'll create an enum. It's going to be called app error or network error. For now, I'll create an enum in that same file, but later we'll take that enum out into its own file. Everybody with me? Okay, so for now, we'll create the enum in the same file here. I'll call enum, I'll call it network error. Okay, and our first case is going to be bad URL. So something went wrong, we want to capture it. We want to capture every place that something went wrong. If something went wrong, we want to capture it with one of our network errors. The first place we capture in something went wrong is a bad URL. Maybe there's a space, right? Maybe it's not even a URL anyway, right? Whatever it is. So how do I handle that bad URL? I could say app error, not app error, network error. That bad URL. This is fine, right? But that's not enough. That's not enough. We'll come back to it. But for now, just simply put let underscore equal. We'll come back to it. How can we capture that URL? How can we pass that URL to the user? Telling the user, hey, it was a bad URL, and this is the string that you gave me. How can I pass that URL to my case? How can I capture it in my case? Not alert. Associated value, right? We saw that today. We saw it in Unit 1. I could use an associated value to capture the string. Because here, I want to capture this URL. I want to pass it here as well. Right? To let the user know what went wrong, like show them that string. Maybe there was a space, maybe it was misspelled, whatever it was. So I use an associated value or string because that's what we want to get. We want to just capture that string. Yes, sir.
Do we have to set it up as, like last time you typed it to error? We have to set it up for that?
Yeah, we have to do that. Like I haven't done that yet. I haven't done the closure part of it yet, but we'll do that. We'll get there.
Okay.
We'll get there. So as a matter of fact, we could actually come back to this guy later. Just know that we're coming back. We'll come back to it later. We're not done. Okay, next step. The URL is good. What do? If my URL is good, at this point I could initiate my data task. I could go ahead and use URLSession, our foundation class there, to create a network request. I could now make use of URLSession to perform the network request. I'll put get in there. Get request to the Jokes API, Jokes Web API. All right, that's all the information we're doing. So I'll use URLSession. Use URLSession to perform the network get request to the Jokes Web API. Network get request. That's fine. The network get request. Use URLSession to perform. Use URLSession to get back JSON data from the Jokes Web API. How does that read? All right. So use URLSession to get back JSON data from the Jokes Web API. Okay. And the getting back data is the get request. Right. So get back JSON data here is the get request. It should. It will. We'll pass it later. Okay. Okay, so use URLSession. We're not done with that, Amini. We just set it up. We'll come back to it. We'll come back to it. We have to have a completion handler there where we pass it to the completion handler. Okay. Okay, so the big part of networking in the iOS, guys, is right here. Line 26. Right? Very soon you'll see what's known as network helper. Right? You'll be using it throughout the rest of the program. You'll forget what URLSession is or how to use it. Today is the day. Make a note. The way you get data from the network is using URLSession, not network helper. Okay? Network helper is not part of iOS. Okay? It's a wrapper we write to make our lives easier. Okay? The class we use is URLSession. All right, so let's use it. As we did last Friday, stop bringing the heat so high. Okay. Don't know. Okay. I'm going to remind us again. I'm going to remind us again. I'm capturing data task here as a constant because URL session, let's go ahead and type in URL. 1 second, I'll type in URL session first and talk about it. So we type out URL session. URL session is the class we use for networking, right? On URL session, there's a singleton. I'll talk about singletons later. I know it's in the lesson, but I don't want to introduce singleton right now on top of URL session. It's too much. So URL session dot shared, right, gets us a default configuration. We talk about configurations. There's a lot to talk about there, but just knowing URL session is what we're talking about. Dot shared, dot data task. And the data task method we're interested in is the data task with the completion handler. So you want to use the data task with URL and completion handler. So it gives us back a closure with 3 arguments. This is the one we're interested in, the one with the closure. And again, I said it last week, but I'll say it again. URL session, you could use a completion handler. It also has a delegate. Okay? You'll see completion handlers being used more with URL session as opposed to delegates. But know there's a delegate that exists. Yes? Shared is a singleton. It gives us by default cache, like it caches by default. So we have our web content locally. C-A-C-H-E. Yeah, we talk about caching. There's a lot to talk about, right? But not everything on the same day. Today, the only thing we're interested in is knowing to use URL session, knowing how to get back data. This is what we're interested in today. Okay, so URL session completion handler here. This is the one we're going for. And the URL we pass in, we have the URL. It's right on line 20. And we have 3 arguments coming back. We have data, which we know what data is now. Data is a blob of bytes. And from those bytes, we have our JSON. And this is what we use to parse into our objects. We have a response. Response has status code. Response has meme type, which we saw from image. Did we use the meme type? I can't remember. But in our image client, I'm just trying to track back what we had. I think we probably saw the meme type. But anyway, response has a status code from 1 to 700 there. And then we have our error. We all know we need to know if something went wrong, what went wrong. And the reason why I always try to introduce URL session with this data task constant, because we'll forget to do, for example, if I showed it last time, I'll show it again. If we do our URL session and we stop here, we run it, we're like, why are we not getting data? Like I have URL session, my completion handler is there, everything is in place. What's wrong, right? There's nothing Xcode will tell you. At this point, Xcode will not tell you anything. There's no error. But with URL session, by default, I'll write that down. By default, URL session data task is suspended. Meaning request is pending. To perform request, you have to resume the data task. Right? In other words, you open up a door, but you don't go through the door to get anything unless you say, on my data task, resume that task. So we have to explicitly say resume. So stopping here is not it. What we could do, we could say resume like that, right? We could say resume. We could say resume like this. This is fine. But I want us to get in the habit of knowing that on the data task itself, it returns a task. And on that particular task, if you're a good citizen with Xcode, you know that we do not leave our code behind We do not leave warnings behind, correct, Julia? We don't walk away from warnings, right? If we have a warning, we have to address it. Here we have a warning, unused constant, right? At this point, we know we have to use that constant here to resume the task, right? At this point, our request will go through, right? There's no suspension anymore. It's not like hanging in thin air. The request goes through, all right? So at this point, we've done enough to actually hit that server or hit that web API. Our request has gone out. If we remember back to our introduction to internet, right, where we had our two symbols, we had the server, we had the client. We remember that, right? And the client makes a request. We made our request already. So now we're waiting for the response and the data back. The response and the data back is those arguments right here. That's where we get back the data, we get back the response, we get back any error. Everybody with me? So that talking back to us there, that response is those three variables. Okay? Great. Yes, sir. Yes, that's what we're gonna be using for the data. Yes. Very good. All right, so let's keep going. Any questions before we move forward? All right, so let's check for errors. Always check for errors first. Always check for failure first, right? So here we say, and everything is optional. Data is optional. Response is optional. Error is optional. So to use them, you have to unwrap them. Okay? So here we have our first unwrapping of error is error. Okay? Okay? And here we'll stop, we'll update our function signature. We'll update our function signature now. And really pay attention here, because we'll be using escaping closures again. I introduced it last week when we spoke about image client, or 2 weeks ago. But here, I'll talk about it again. Escaping closures, the function returns before the closure gets its value set. Okay? Pay attention there. We have a closure, we'll add a closure inside of our parameter list. We'll add an escaping closure. You have to mark it escaping because it's an asynchronous call. It's a network call. There's no knowing when that network call will be done. So that's an asynchronous call. Yes?
Is that because technically when we do a URL session that shares that data, that function itself returns
URL session by itself is asynchronous.
and it returns more? Is that why we have?
No, that's not why. Why we have to do it because URL session is by itself an asynchronous API. Okay? By default, it does not return right away that value you're looking for. It's done on the background, right? Okay? It's not like you pick up the phone, you call your mom, you get her right away. You leave a message, she calls you back when she wants. Right? Hopefully she calls back the day you need that, right? Whatever you need from her, right? So it's not done right away. It's asynchronous. Everybody with me? So asynchronous is you expect something to come back as to when you don't know, right? You made a request for time off. Hopefully your manager gives it to you back, right, within the week because you have an airline ticket you need to book, right? So that's asynchronous. You expect it to come back to you, but you don't know when, okay? So here we have URLSession giving us a data task. We expect it to give us back our values. We don't know when those values are going to come back. It's asynchronous. So our function returns before the closure gets set. We have to mark it escaping. It's an escaping closure. Okay? It's an escaping closure. So let's go ahead and update our signature here. Right? So the name of our closure is completion. The name of our closure is completion. You could call your closure whatever you want to call it. You could call it callback, which other languages use. You could call it whatever you want. But the important thing to not leave out here is at escaping. Okay? And it's a closure. For now, we'll have a default closure. What does that closure do? What does that closure do? I'm using closure syntax here. What is this? What does this do? David. Right, it doesn't take in anything. It doesn't return anything. Right? That's our basic closure. That's how we got introduced to closures. Right? But our closure has values. We spoke about result type when we spoke about image cram. We spoke about result type. Result type has two parameters. It has an error and it has a success, or it has a failure and success. Either something went well or something didn't go that well. In that case, either we have an error or we have our jokes, right? So we'll have a result type. Again, result type is newly introduced to Swift. So what are we introducing here? We're introducing, or reintroducing, introducing topics, or introducing topics. We have escaping closures. Guys, please, I will send out resources later. We need to read on that stuff to understand what it is. I said it. Ask me all the questions you have, but go back and write your own notes of what you understand it to be. Because those are the big interview questions there. Introducing topics, we have escaping closures, we have result type. And this one is new in Swift 5.0, right? Okay. What else we seen new here? We saw URLSession. I know you guys know associated values, but please, again, look at associated values. Okay, let's keep going. Good. Okay, so here we have our closure. Let's update our closure here. It's going to take in a result type. Our result type use angle brackets. Those are generics. That's why I really want to talk about generics. Yeah, one of the requirements is an error. The other requirement is up to you. It could be a string, it could be your own jokes array, it could be whatever you want. But you have to pass in an error as well. So what are we passing in here? We are passing a jokes array, joke array, and some sort of error. Yes. Yes. Because I said success failure, right? So result type was result type. Result type new in Swift, right? Has a success or failure. Well, success or failure case, right? It's an enum. Result type is an enum. New in Swift 5 has a success or failure case. Allows us to write better network code and handling errors. Also better view controller logic. Right? Because in the view controller, all we have to say is switch on the result type. Either it's a case error or a case failure. That's it. Before that, we would have to write our own custom closure syntax and our own errors to handle stuff. But now result type is easier. Either it's case error or case failure or case success. Cool. So this is what our result type looks like. We have an array of jokes. That would be the success part of it. The failure part of it would be an error. But we'll go one step further. This error, the angle brackets is required. That's generic. That signals a generic type. Yes, that's why I want to talk about generics tomorrow. At least introduce what generics are with stacks. Okay? So we know what that angle bracket really means. That's why a set, when you see a set with the angle brackets, again, arrays are generics, dictionaries are generics. That's why we could put any type into an array. Like I could have an int array, I could have a string array, I could have a double array, I could have a person array. because it's a generic. Generic by nature, it's any type. It allows you to work with any type. Okay? Cool. Okay, so let's update our error here. Everybody, please update your network error to conform to error. So if we conform to error, we conform into error here. So conforming to the error protocol. We need to conform to the error protocol in order to make our network error a type on result type, right? If we want to make, instead of error here, we could make our own network error here, but it needs to conform to error protocol. And this network error is conforming to the error protocol. Where are you going? The juicy stuff is just happening. Come on. Okay.
Wait.
All right, so we updated our network error, and here we could update our error here to network error. We'll do this a couple times, right? So don't get too overwhelmed here. Just please do the request I asked for. Please read up on what URLSession is. Please read more on escaping closures. All that is in the Swift documentation. I'll send it out to us. But please read more on it. But we'll talk more about it. Okay, so we have our joke here. So let's keep refactoring here. So now I have, let's update what my bad URL looks like. So bad URL, let's update our bad URL. Line 26, let's refactor it. So in line 26, I'll use my completion handler to now return a failure. If I have a bad URL, it's not success. Everybody agrees, right? If it's a bad URL, something went wrong. So what do? I say completion dot failure, right? Dot failure. And now I could pass in any network error I want. The network error I'll pass in is the one we have. We only have one right now. So I'll pass in dot bad URL. Please let me know if I need to go back. I'm pasting it slow here. Yes. So you haven't erased the line, right? Did you erase your line? You did. Let's go back again, please. Let's follow along here, because closure is one thing already, and the next thing is just we want to make sure. So make sure you remove your line, Mel. Remove the line. Put in completion. Open parenthesis. Dot. It's a failure. We're in a bad URL here. This is a bad URL. We're going to pass it to our network error. So, failure. We want to pass in one of our network errors, because if we're in a failure case, we should pass in what error happened. Everybody with me? In that particular case, I want to say it's a bad URL. Okay? And you see why we have the associated type on bad URL. Now we could capture that URL and just pass it back to the user. That's nice. Okay, so here the URL, I just pass in URL. Well, not URL, but whatever they passed in. It should be endpoint, sorry. Endpoint URL string. Whatever they passed in. It will just print out the same URL.
But you can write bad URL and then put it.
We could do that later, which we might. We might do a description on our enum to give more descriptive language about what the case is. Okay, we'll come into that later. Okay, cool. So we handled our first bad case here, our error case. Let's keep going. So if we get down to check for errors, we have an error here. We also want to pass in some error. So let's update our enum. We'll say case network client error. And there we pass in our associated value is an error, because the error has an error, right?
What? Can you go over that one?
Just do the associated value. We'll go down and we'll see what it is. We'll see what we pass into it. Okay, so we have our network client error. We go down here, and if something goes wrong with our error, we simply say completion. Again, it's a failure. What network error are we passing here? Network client. And here we're capturing the error. We're just simply passing error. Okay? Doing good. Make sure your associated values updated here. We have a second case in our enum. Your network error. Now, do a command B. Command B, case network error, client error, right? And here, simply say network error and then pass in error. Did you say if let error here? Are you unwrapping your error? What is it saying? What's the error? That takes no arguments. Did you update your completion handler? Here. Yeah. On declare, did you call your joke joke or did you call it jokes? Go back to your struct. What did you call it? So it exists, right? In your struct, you have struct joke open curly, and here you have an array of joke. And command B. Bring it up. Let me see what's going on. Okay, so let's keep going. The next thing we're interested in is guard let URL response equal to our response as HTTP URL URL HTTP. What am I? Sorry, HTTP URL response. This. Let me see what's going on with your thing. Else. And here we need to handle our bad response. So this is going to be bad response, network error. What's happening? Oh, your joke is in the wrong place. Your joke should be part of this guy. It's not part of the text. That's what it is. Go back to, even also this guy is in the wrong place. Anything that's not a test, it should be part of the app itself. It's already working, actually. That's just a different error. Cool? Okay. Remember we said we have a response, right? The response has a status code in it, right? So like status code 200, 404, so on and so forth. So here we're also unwrapping it to an HTTP URL response type, right? And here if something goes wrong, let's go ahead and update our case. So case will simply say no response. I don't think we need an associated type for that. So no response is no response. And we'll come down here. We'll say completion failure dot no response, no response. API client in the view controller. Let's first handle the API client. I know you want to eagerly see your work, the dividends of your work. In the view controller, like we did with image client. In the view controller, wherever we need it, we'll be calling that API client. It will give us either an error or all the jokes we want. In the view controller. Okay? All right, so here we have our response, and we simply say return here. What's that, sir? No response came from here, network. error. Okay? All right. Let's keep going. So at this point, what else we have? We have data, right? So guard let data equal to data, else return. So here we have no data. So we'll update. Go ahead and add a new case for your data called no data. Yeah, add a new case, no data, so we could throw it. So go here, add a new case, no data. Because if we in the guard statement, if we here and we get to this line 50, that means data is nil. Everybody? Right? Data is nil. We throw an error, no data. Let's go ahead and do that. So completion dot failure, no data. Okay. Cool. So let's find out what is our status code. Find out what the status code. So we'll use a switch, Swift, on our URL response dot status code. Status code is an int, by the way. Let me just verify that here. So status code is an int. So we'll simply say if the case is 200 to 299, then break. Everything went well here. Everything went well. Else, we have a default. Else, we'll have a default here with our final network error. At this point, if something went wrong, that means we have a bad status code. Okay? So update your enum to capture bad status code. We'll pass in, what will the associated value be there? An int, right? Very good. So with associated value for our bad status code, we'll simply pass in an int. We could go ahead and update it while people are still typing. What's that? Ask all the questions. Today's the day to ask questions. Can we go up? Can I move the code up? Can I go up? Okay, so let's go up and update our.
Sorry, a question. Does which both responses are set to break?
No, I'm not done with the last one. That's what we're going to do now. So bad status code, the associated value is an integer. Please make sure you update this last case here. Case bad status code. Associated value, integer. We'll just pass it to the view controller, whatever it is. Maybe it's 404, whatever it is. Cool? Anything that's not in the 200s, right, is not a success. So we'll pass it to the user of our function. Where are we? So instead of that last break here, we'll simply say completion. It's a failure. We'll throw bad status code. And we'll pass in URL response dot status code. That's it. Our last step is simply to use the data we have here to create our model. So use data to create our joke model. Okay? Great. So let's go ahead and do that. What are we doing? We're going to use a do catch. Why are we using a do catch here? Why do we use do catches? I'm about to go use JSON decoder. Why am I using a do catch? To catch an error, because JSON decoder throws an error, we need to mark JSON decoder as try. That's what I'm saying, guys. We've been doing this for a week and a half. If you have questions, ask the questions. But right now, I need feedback from you to show understanding. Like, do I understand why am I using a do catch? If you don't, you need to stop us,
Okay.
right?
So do catch is only when an error is possible?
A throw. When a method throws an error, right? I wrap it in a do catch because now I'm about to try a method that could throw an error. And the catch block catches the error. That's where the error is. Throw. Okay? I need more feedback from us, right? So here I will say let jokes equal to try, right? The minute I say try here, the method is throwing an error. That's why I'm marking it as a try. When the error gets thrown, it gets thrown inside the catch block. Okay? So here I'm going to try to say JSON decoder. I'm decoding my object. We tested it already, so that should all pass. So now we say the code is joke. That's self. It's an array. And we use the data from the response. And now we have our jokes. And in case we do have an error, I did say in my last case, but we have one more case. In case we do have an error, we need to handle that error too. So we'll update our network error with one more case. The case will be called decoding error with an associated type error. Okay? This part here should be familiar by now. We've been using it for a week and a half or 2 weeks, right? And we know we wrap it in a do catch because there's a possibility that this will throw an error. We've seen many times where my JSON was not properly formatted or cannot find a key, right? All those are useful because we have the catch block. That's where the error is thrown. Okay? Yes, sir. It's not coming through. You mean this line here? 1 second. Are we good with the do block here? Okay, so let's go up and add one more error case here. So we have decoding error. Christian, make sure you have bad status code here with associated int. Okay. Uh-huh. Not any type, only methods that throw errors. If the method is marked with throws, it throws an error. Very similar to our init decoder earlier today. That throws, it explicitly throws an error. Data contents of throws an error. Anything that has to do with like networking or looking inside of a file, it should throw an error. If it's not throwing an error, it's a bad API because something could go wrong. You try to open a file, you try to access a network, there's a potential something is wrong. Maybe there's no more space in your disk, whatever it is. A good API with a function like that, it should throw the user an error, right? Cool. Okay, so we have our jokes. Now we have a catch here. Let's catch the error. It's a failure if we came to the catch block. What error are we throwing here? Decoding error, okay. And I pass in error. Great. And our final and last completion, success. Right? We got the jokes back. So now we have our completion here, and we have success here, and we pass in our jokes. Right? Cool? Great. Any questions before we move to the view controller? Wait. Wow. Okay. All right. What are we doing?
Oh, we did the failure first. That's what
We did a bunch of failures. The last thing is okay, the success, right? We checked all possibilities of things going wrong. We correctly identified those things with an error. Shania. Oh, yeah.
Oh, we had to put a new case before the error?
Yes. From the top, we had our URL string. One second. Can we go up? Okay, we can. All right, let's review what we did. So we created a struct. It's called Jokes API Client. Its functionality is to query this endpoint here. That one string we have. The objective of this one function is to use that string, package that string, make a request from that API, get us back the data. At the end of the day, that's all we want. We want back our JSON data to pass the data into the models. Okay? So what are we doing? First step, we have our URL. Our URL, we call it endpoint URL string. It's a string. We use a guard here to create a URL. A URL is a data type. Everybody? URL is a data type. Here you could construct a URL using a string. We passed in a string. It's an optional. If it's valid, it returns us the valid URL. We went into URLSession. We said we need the URLSession class. This is the gateway to the internet. We use our URLSession class. That's shared. That shared is a singleton. We'll talk about it. Don't need to know too much about it right now because we've been using bundle.main, same singleton. So we have a singleton there, one instance of URLSession throughout the app. The one thing I'll tell us is, as far as like URLSession.shared goes, you want to use one instance of it throughout your app. This is recommended by Apple. So later we'll see how to package this entire class in what's known as like a network helper, right? You might see it into this lesson, but we'll have like a network helper here where you have one network helper throughout the app. But for here, we're using one endpoint, so that's fine. We have URLSession. What does URLSession do? It's a gateway for the internet. It makes a request. It packages that request in a form of a task. A task is a job, right? Somebody gave you a task to do, you did the task. So URLSession, it has a job to do. The data task. It returns us that data task, which we resume here. And we said what resume is and why we need to resume. If you don't do resume, you never get back the data because it's always in a suspended state. So being that we say resume, everything is good. From the network, we get back those three objects. We get back data, raw data, the data we've been seeing throughout our .json files, very similar. The data that we see on Postman, that data that we see on Postman, this is the data that we get back, right? So we get back data, we get back a response. A response has a status code. If everything went well, it has other variables as well. It has like headers and all that stuff. It has a lot of stuff in there. Error, maybe there's no connection. If there's no connection, you get back that string in the error data type. So first we check for an error, right? We say if there's an error, meaning if error is not nil, right? If error is nil, there's no error. Everybody with me? I'm gonna write that down, obviously here. So if error is nil, there was no network error. Okay, great. But if error does have an error, like if we unwrapped it and it's not nil, something went wrong. If something goes wrong, we use our network error data type that we created here, right? We created this data type to package all the possible errors we could have. Everybody with me? right? This is where enums are very powerful. It's a finite amount of errors. I package it in an enum with associated values. You capture every error with the particular name it is. And be very descriptive with the names. Our first case where something could go wrong is the bad URL. If it goes wrong, we send a bad URL error. Next here, the bad URL, right? If there's no bad URL, we come here, if there's an error, it's a network client error. Maybe your phone is out of service or whatever it is. That's where this block is going to get run. It will tell you network connection failed. If there's no error, we go to check our response. Maybe the response is nil, right? Maybe the server is down. Who knows? Yes?
I get what happens when there's like the parentheses after, but what happens when you don't want to know
Well, we're not down. We're going down chronologically, right? I'm still up with your response.
No, but I know, but like above it, it says error, so it's gonna like
This error here,
yeah.
if we pass in the error, like error is a data type, it has. I'll be able to say I'll be able to see what the error is.
Yeah, but when nothing's passed in,
Well, there's no way nothing will pass in here. Like if something passes in here, that means error is not nil.
not in that one. I'm talking about the one like no response and no data. Don't have to.
We're just gonna see no response. That's enough for us. Like no response, it was nil. There's no error passed there. We don't get an error here. The response, if we get here, it's just nil. Like we try to unwrap it, and it's nil. There's nothing. Dead silence. Okay, next up we have data. Again, if it comes here, Chelsea, to your point, data is absolutely nil. Like it's almost like the request hasn't even made. Next up we have URL response. Where are I? Okay, let me stop here. Nobody asked me about this. So we cast it to a HTTP URL response. Because response by itself is not an HTTP data type, right? This is the parent, this is the subclass. We subclass it to the type. Like we do with our UI view controller, and we cast it to a detailed view controller, everybody. The parent is the UI view controller. In our case here, response, if we option click on response, what type is it? It's a URL response, right? It's the parent class, right? So that doesn't have a status code on it. So we typecast it to a subclass HTTP URL response, which has a status code on it. Everybody with me? Very careful there. Okay. Please stop me when you don't see. I'm sorry? Response is the parent. URL response is the parent. HTTP URL response is the subclass. So here, URL response, we cast it to a URL response. Why do we do it? Because we want to get access to the status code. Okay, that's why we cast it to a URL response there. Okay, so downcast to HTTP URL response to get access to the status code. Okay, that's why we do that. Again, if we come to the completion where it's failure, no response, that means response is absolutely nil. Yes, Tiffany?
So when we get to the default there, right? Because we have it for the case where it would come back proper because we have the
In that case, we'll send back what the bad response code is. It could be anything that's not 200s,
right.
which is valid, which will give us information. Because it could be you don't have authorization for that API. So we'll get it back like a 404 error, not authorized or something like that, 403, right?
I guess I'm just trying to understand the default.
Let's get down there first, because I don't want to go back and forth with the code. I want to go top down. Okay? So next up, we have data here. We unwrap the data, because again, all those objects are nil. So I unwrap my data. I have valid data. If I don't have valid data, data is absolutely nil. Right? Next, to go to your point here, we switch on the URL response .status code. Now, URL response has a status code property. I find out, is it 200 to 299? If it is, then everything is okay. I just break out of the switch statement. If it's not, then I need to handle that error. It's an error, right? It's an error. It's a bad status code. So here, I access the status code and I just pass it to the user, to the view controller, whoever is using this function. Now they'll be able to see what error, what status code that came back. Right? Is it a server error, whatever error it is. The most important part of getting our data here is this do catch here, which we finished on. We wrap a do catch to get our jokes array. We use a try here on our JSON decoder because it throws an error. Decode throws an error. If there's an error, which it does throw an error, the error will be captured in our catch block. This is where we have our decoding error. If you come here, it could only be a decoding error. Maybe the JSON is mildly formatted. Maybe your key was spelled wrong. Whatever it is there, that's what we catch it. So we're able to catch all errors. It's good to be able to catch errors. We like to read errors. We fix errors, we move on. Let's go test our view controller, and we'll stop there and we'll continue tomorrow. So go to the view controller here. In my view did load, let's actually write a function. Write a function, call it fetch jokes, well, load jokes. And load jokes will access the joke struct. On it, we have, what do we have? Sorry, we have our API client. Jokes API client dot fetch and we have result. Great. So we have a function here, it's called load jokes. It uses our API client, which we just wrote. We just wrote that. It has one single function on it called fetch jokes. Fetch jokes has one argument. It's a closure. What we know about closures, we know if you have one argument, it's the closure, we could use trading closure syntax, correct? So this here is closing, trading closure syntax, right? Right, stop me. Okay. If we go back to our function, right? Back to unit 1 again. We have a closure. If we have a closure in a function definition, function signature, we use trading closure syntax. You do not put parens and put an argument in there. You write the name of your function, space, and trailing curlies. This is called trading closure syntax. So the trading closure syntax. I want us to get deeper in reading and watching extra resources so that we will become experts on topics. I know they said reading is fundamental, but like programming, like this stuff here is heavy stuff. It's heavy. Like what we're doing here is not enough. You have to go outside of it and read more. Read more, come back and challenge us or whatever it is. Or be on the page and like really, like there's a lot there. Okay, so we have result. What is result? What is result again? What type is result? What data type is result? It's an enum, right? How do we access enums or how do we read through enums? We use a switch, right? Enums and switches, they work together very well. So here we have our result, because our closure has the result type in there. So we switch on result. What are the two cases of result? Very good. So here we have case failure, and it's an associated value. So here my network error, I simply say error. I'll come back to writing what we'll write in here. And what's my next case? Success. And here we have our jokes. Great. So if we have our jokes, I'll simply dump the jokes out. And if we have an error, I'll simply print the error out. Or better yet, let's see something new. Why not? We'll create a UI alert controller to present to the user. The what? Oh, dump, instead of printing out a blob of stuff, dump creates like a hierarchy, more like a table format of your data. So it's easier to read. So when we print it out, it's structured such that it's easier to read. You'll see number of elements, and you'll see it in a tabular format, a list format in the console. Yeah. Okay, so we have error here. We're creating an alert controller. So let alert, an alert controller is a view controller in itself, but it presents the user like a dialogue. We've all seen dialogues on our phones, right? Whether it be Android or iOS, we've seen like a dialogue, something went wrong. So we're gonna present the user a dialogue of an error, okay? As opposed to printing something. So here I'll say alert controller equal to UI alert controller. Alert controller has an initializer here. We'll use the initializer that has the title. It has a title, so the title of the alert, a message, like whatever message we want to tell the user, and a style. For the style, we'll simply use the default style. So for here, we'll say, we'll just say network error for the title. For the message, we'll simply pass in error here, whatever the error is. We'll just string interpolate it. And for the preferred style, we'll simply say default. All right. What's happening there? Action sheet. Right. So there's an action sheet or an alert, sorry, not default. Swift. So either you present an action sheet, like some action the user will take, or some alert. And next up, what do we have? We will have one single action because the user needs to be able to dismiss the dialog. Everybody? We've never seen a dialog without any dismiss buttons. So we need to pass in a dismiss button. We'll pass in, we'll just call it OK action. OK action is a UI alert action. That also takes in some parameters. Title, we'll simply say OK. The style, we will say, it's not destructive. We'll just say default here. Default. And handlers, no handlers. And now we have enough stuff to show. So alert controller, we say add action on alert controller. The action we pass in is the OK action. So we have our alert controller. We have one single action, one button. On our view, we'll have one button. It will be called OK. We need to pass in our alert controller that OK action. That's what we're doing there. So we're saying alert controller, you have one action. It's that OK action that we created here. And final step, we just need to present it. So we simply say present. You're in a view controller. You're in a view controller. A view controller could present another view controller. So on my view controller, I have this present function here. I simply pass in alert controller. For animation, I'll say true. Completion, I'll pass in nil. Implicit use of self, right. I'm in a closure. So again, I'm in a closure, I need to say self dot. On my object. Okay. So all that for one dialog box, right? But your user gets feedback. You're not going to show your user a print statement. They cannot see the print statement. They could see an alert. So don't submit code to an employer with print statements for errors. You want to present an alert. Something went wrong visually to the user. Right? They want to know something went wrong. As far as like the success case, tomorrow we'll pick up and we'll talk about, we'll just show it in the table view. At this point, we could definitely do it, but I want to stop while we're here. But first, let's run the app. But before you run the app, just call load jokes here in your view controller. Julia, what's the question? Okay, make sure you call load jokes in the view did load. In view did load, make sure you call load jokes in view did load. Run the app, and let's see what all our hard work is doing for us. Hey, we got data. Okay, so Mel, this is what the dump looks like as opposed to a print statement. It's better organized, right? It's a list format. We see we have 10 jokes. We see joke number 1, the ID, everything, right? It's very clearly formatted. So at this point, success, right? We wrote our API client. We were able to get data into our view controller. We were able to use dump to see what the jokes were. At this point, it's just UI, right? Just UI, setting up a table view, showing the data, but the hard work is done, right? Any questions? Do you want us to go back to API client? Do you want us to, any other questions? Yes, sir.
I kind of just want to see the, you said it'll create a visual alert.
Oh, you want to make sure, oh, you want to see the alert. Okay. We could turn off the Wi-Fi, or we could just make something bad happen to our JSON. So I could go to my JSON here. Well, I don't have JSON. Oh, my model, sorry. I could go to my model. Everybody go to the model. Matt wants to see the alert, right? So go to your model and just change anything here that you want to change. So instead, I just removed the P in my setup. I just removed P from the setup. So Matt is a true QA master, right? He doesn't just want to see success. He wants to see what's happening when something bad happens. So here, I'm going to run the app again. I think I know this problem. This is going to be a different problem, sir. Background thread. Okay, we're doing stuff on the background thread here. Can everybody see the error, by the way? Please scroll up and make sure you identify this error. It says, we're about to update the UI on the background thread. The UI alert should be in a dispatch main. Remember we spoke about concurrency and we spoke about background threads? So our UI is happening on a background thread. We want to put it on the main thread. This is that crash. Let's see what that looks like. Let's go back. Or that blob. It reads, it says, being called. Okay, what's being called? It says UI view. Let's see the whole line here. It says UI view set animation enabled being called from a background thread, performing any operation from a background thread on UI view or a subclass is not supported and may result in unexpected and insidious behavior. What's that? Oh no! So this is a stack trace, right? This is a stack trace of what went wrong. And I go to the beginning of it, like right at error 0 there on the stack, and see what the error says. A more descriptive, yeah, right before the 0.
So right.
Yeah.
So the numbers are all the things that went wrong.
Yes, like in all the different threads, like all the call stack. This is the call stack.
And this is just from removing the P instead of all of this happening.
Well, trying to update UI on a background thread. But let's see. Let's go back. Where are we? Hello. Are we here? Okay, so we're about to update this UI right here. This one line of code here. Let's go ahead and put this on the main thread. So dispatch. I'm back in the the Jokes API client. So let's go ahead and dispatch it back to the main thread. Remember we did that with images last week or 2 weeks ago? Where the image was happening in the background thread and it showed us the purple error. You remember? Right? So this is this very similar thing. I'm in view controller. View controller.
Oh, yeah. Where do you put it?
I'm in the view controller. I'm where we created the alert. Right in the failure block. I'm right in the failure block. And everything here is on the background thread right now. Because we're coming back from a background thread. Remember, URL session, you have to remember one thing about URL session today. Remember, it's an asynchronous call. It's been done on the background. Everybody, please? Okay? So when you're coming back from an async call and you're updating your UI, you have to do your UI on what? Where do you update your UI?
Oh,
That's what I'm saying. Like we did the notes. If I go back to the last project we did, we wrote like a paragraph of notes on why we should update UI code on the main thread. Our top stories app, right? So always update UI on the main thread. We spoke about it. I could go back to the video. No, we're not gonna. But it was the first day we saw it, a mini. It's a lot. Trust me. So that we'll come back on it more and more. Every day we talk about it. We say why we go on the UI on the main thread. We need to be in the main thread to update UI. Because UI is main thread. The user needs to be able to do all the activities quickly. Okay?
what you want to do is not just return an image. This is from the image menu. The image.
Yeah.
You cannot just return an image from this function. Why? Because the URL session performs an asynchronous network call, which means the call relies on the network and is done on the background, not performed instantaneously. That's what you mean?
Yeah, and then go back to where we setting up the image client image, the actual image, in the cell for row and detail view. Cell for row and detail view, there's comments there. With dispatch main async.
Okay, so you set it up, but we didn't do it. Oh, was that?
Maybe you were not there. Anyway, let's keep going. Everybody dispatch their alert controller on the main thread, yes? Okay, let's run our app again. And voila, we have our alert controller with a blob of errors. Everybody got the alert controller showing up? And if we did not add the action, we would not have that OK button. Everybody sees that. In my OK, on line 25, do we see line 25? Line 25 adds this button explicitly. Do we see that? Yulia, are you smiling at the alert controller or the lack of alert controller? What is the error? Fail to what? Can you command R? Did everybody get the alert controller to show up? Right? Cassandra? Good. Can we dismiss it by clicking on the OK button? Right? Great. So this particular error was a decoding error because we intentionally changed our status to something else or whatever it was. Let's go back and fix it. So go back and fix my error. Setup, right? We could try other things. We could turn off our network. So turn off your Wi-Fi. Turn off your Wi-Fi. Run your app again. The results may have cached, but let's see. They may have cached the results, but let's see. Turn off your Wi-Fi, run the app again. Right, look at that. This one is a network client error, and at the end of the day, it says the internet connection appears to be offline, which it is. Can we see, right? We all have it on our screens, correct? You turn off your Wi-Fi, you run the app again, network error coming from the if-let error. In our if-let error block, this is where that error is coming from. Everybody? To the what? Load jokes. This guy? Next time I ask about main thread, we'll all know, right? We'll all know why. Tiffany? Right? Cool. How are we doing a minute? You good? What's your question? There's a question about load jokes. Load joke simply uses the result type. It switches on it. Either we have a failure or we have a success. If we have a failure, that entire code, by the way, let's please do this right now. Just take all that blob. Actually, that's fine for now. But no, that could get refactored into its own function. Refactor. You're gonna click on what? Refactor in. You mean the OK button? Your double check. I mean, the OK button is there. You should be able to click on it.
I put like capital of
Okay. Any other questions before we end lecture? Many questions? With what? Yes, I'm not the figuring out part. Please, for homework. We don't have labs today. You know what I want you guys to do? Go back through everything we did. Make notes for yourself. I said it last time. I know I said it already. And the day before that. And the day before that.
It's a 4-hour video, so
No, not the video. I'm just talking about. It's not 4 hours, by the way. I could do a 4-hour one day, but there's no 4-hour one yet. The last part? Yeah. I could go over anything you want. This part here? Which one? The alert controller one? I mean the view controller. The last part is the alert controller. Is that what you're talking about? So in the view controller, this particular code here, the alert controller, it just presents the user an alert saying what went wrong. Now, the first thing we did, we created this alert controller. It's a class. It's called UI alert controller. First day we're seeing it today. It presents the user a dialog. The user could perform an action on that dialog, right? You should give them an action, at least one action, being able to dismiss it. So I set up my alert controller. My initializer for the alert controller takes in the title. In that case, where is my app? The title is network error. The body is the message. For the message, what do we pass in? We simply passed in what the error is. Next, we said we need to be able to dismiss this dialog, correct? The only way to dismiss it is to give it an action button, right? To give it an action button, we created an OK action. That OK action is a UI alert action. You with me?
yeah, I was thinking of like a button
No storyboard. This is like a view controller. It's part of iOS. It comes in the box free of charge. We could just use it and, right? There's only so much you could do with it, by the way. So we have our alert action. You could have multiple actions. I could have an OK. I could have a cancel. I could have a lot of, right? I have my alert, a mini. What are you doing to me? I have my UI alert. Okay, 1 second. I have my UI alert action, right? My UI alert action takes in a title. What is the title? The title is the OK button, right? The style, it could be destructive, like if you're deleting your Instagram post, anything you're doing that's destructive, you could pass in a destructive style. The style I passed is a default style. Default style is the button as it's shown right now. Destructive would be red. Something bad is about to happen. What else? We have a handler here. We could pass in a completion to do more things afterwards. The handler is a completion handler, but I'm just passing in nil. For now, just know that I passed in nil.
So is there any way to do that same thing in the network, but you have this whole block of code that it shows in users? I mean, users don't know what that is.
No, we're not going to show them that. We'll make it better descriptive. We could go back to the enum and make a description on our enum to be more human readable. Okay? As opposed to giving them that entire blob. I just showed us that for purposes of showing an alert. Yeah. You're not going to show them the coding error, first of all. You'll tell them something went wrong in a better way. Okay? And first of all, they shouldn't see decoding error because you're the developer. You shouldn't ship code with decoding errors. But at least they'll see the network errors. Those are the big ones. And simply, or what you'll say is internet is offline. Next up, we have our alert. We added the action. Everybody, we added the action to the alert controller. And last step is to present it. You could do everything you're doing, but it's not going to get presented unless you say, present my controller. Everybody with me? Very similar to like push in here. Present the controller, show it to the user. And we said we had to take one step back. We had a crash. The crash said, you cannot update a view on a background thread. Please remember what that is, what that says, what that means. Anytime you see one of those crashes, you need to know, what UI am I updating? What UI am I showing? The one piece of UI we're doing here is this piece of UI. Line 31 is this piece of UI. It updates the UI. So I need to put it on the main thread. So here we're using dispatch queue, which is part of GCD, which is part of concurrency. Multiple things could happen at the same time. So we say, go ahead, dispatch on the main thread. We'll talk about concurrency on Thursday. We dispatch on the main thread. We presented the view. What are you running to? We dispatched on the main thread, and we presented the alert controller. Okay, Mel? Everybody? Greg? Cool. So that's alert controller. We saw alert controller today. This is what it looks like. And we're able to dismiss it by pressing the OK button. Tomorrow we'll continue with this project. We'll just show it in the table view. And then that'll be it for this particular project. Questions? Why do I lose let in cases? Oh, this particular error here. I don't want to change error. I have to make it a variable or a constant. I choose a constant because I don't want to change what error is. That's it. I'm unpacking the error from my network. Remember, it's an associated value. No, it has to be let error. Okay? Very similar to every other enum, we have an associated value on. Cool. Shania? No. You had a question? Brendan? What are you referring to? Oh, the test. We're just testing our model. This particular example here, we were just testing the model. Does our model correctly identify with the JSON we get in? No, we just want to make sure that our JSON here creates two objects. That's all the test did, right? Test joke model is only testing the model. Like, is our model identified with the JSON we get in? Okay, get in the habit of doing this. If you do one test, that's a test you should do. Like, is my model correct? As opposed to testing your JSON with the UI, test it in a unit test like that. Cool? Any other questions? Yes, sir. No, I said the URL is an asynchronous test. Or we could do a mock test. We'll get into those later. But if we have to test our API client, it's an asynchronous test. Where we have to give it an expectation, we have to give it a timeout. It's no longer a unit test. It's no longer fast. It depends on the network. Okay, cool? Any other questions? Yes. The enum for the network error. That enum here, right? Of the different errors, yes. Associated values. Because some of them we want to capture them. Associated value, yes. For example, our decoding error, it has an error to the user. And then our bad status code has an int because status code is an int. Cool? Any other questions? Questions, questions, questions. Yes, sir. Escaping. So the function signature takes in one parameter, which happens to be a closure. It's a completion handler. Escaping here because the function returns before my closure is set. What's that? When I call a function, it returns back to whoever calls it. Right? But that's why we have the trading closure there. The trading closure will get called at any point when the data is coming back from the network. The trading closure, if I go back to my view controller, that trading closure here, I do not get that back right away. There's some delay. It could be instant. It could not be. It's asynchronous. I don't know when it comes back. So I cannot explicitly say return. I cannot explicitly say return jokes. So I have to have a completion handler. And I have to mark it escaping because the closure itself is not done yet. The function returns back to the view controller. The function returns right away. But the closure is what captures the value of the jokes. Get me? When the closure returns, when the closure captures the jokes, this particular block of code gets called or gets executed. Bienvenido. Everybody, please pay attention here. So, Bienvenido is asking a very good clarification question. What's happening if I were escaping closure here? I call my function fetch jokes. It returns right away to the view controller. Right? It returns right away, meaning I get back some, it's void, doesn't return anything. It returns back right away. But the big part of this is knowing that our closure here, our closure here captures a value. So whenever the jokes gets returned back from the network, this closure gets executed. Okay? That's a very important part to know. That closure gets executed when my jokes or my error gets executed. Meaning when it comes back from the network, that's when this function gets invoked. That's when that closure gets invoked. That's a big part of escaping closures. Okay? That's why I cannot just say return jokes. Return jokes will return right away with an empty joke. Always. Unless I use a completion handler with escaping to capture. Because closures capture references. It captures whatever that comes back from the network, and then we have it in the view controller. Yes, exactly. And we have a bunch of error cases.
Well, I'm looking at escaping for result here in the switch case, with the dot failure, is a non error, success, and then I asked that there's an option to result right there. You see success and failure.
Those are the two cases. In the angle bracket, those are the two cases. Either we have an array of jokes or we have an error.
So the portion is the result never occurred. That's just saying the result is going to return the result never occurred.
Yes, result will have those two possible cases. Either it has our array or it has an error. Yes, for success or failure, right? Because result type itself is success or failure. Exactly, exactly. And again, we could have an array here, we could have a dictionary, whatever object is that success object, that's what we have. That's why it's a generic, and that's why we'll talk about generics tomorrow. Any other questions? Yes, sir. I'm not too crazy about singletons, to be frank. I only use them when I have to use them, when I'm forced to use them. We might end up using them very soon when we go back into network helper, where we encapsulate our network helper. But here we have a simple function with a class method or a type method. Keeps everything simple, right? A singleton will give you access to it throughout, which the static type does as well, right? But yeah, so there's no difference right now between that and the singleton case. If anything, the singleton case adds a layer of complexity that I need to explain to people, seeing all that stuff. And then seeing like a singleton, you have an instance that only happens once. Like, Okay? I want to keep, there's enough complexity on top of this already. I want to keep singleton off the table until we really need it. Does that make sense? Like if you have a user settings, it's probably best to be of a singleton manager there. Cool. Any other questions? May? We good? We're gonna make notes, right? And next time we come back, we'll know what dispatch main key does. We'll know what result type is. We gotta read, guys. I showed us all the introducing topics we have here. I want us to go back and see what enum associated values are. I want us to read up on URLSession. I sent out the document. I want us to read up on escaping closures. There's a Swift document for that. Let me take a break here and show us. So simple Google searches. Escaping closures, Swift. No internet. Okay. No, we turn off the internet on purpose. So this is documents. I'll send out the documents and I'll end the lecture. So here we have closures. Come up, closures. And I know we bookmarked Swift language guide from day one. I know we all have it. Like Christmas witch to Santa. Before the Medium article, right? You could Slack the Medium article. But before the Medium article, this is coming from the Swift language guide. What are closures, escaping closures? You see that those two paragraphs right there? You read it. Read it again. Read it again. And it will start getting clearer to us. So this is the big one here. Now, if we look at that photo and we bookmark closures, guys, if you want to be really strong in Swift here, closures is one of the topics. You just have to bookmark the thing and read it and know what it does. This is one of those topics. Very similar to delegation patterns. Those are the big topics in iOS. What's the next one we said? So enums, associated values. If we go back to enums here, just go back to enums here where it talks about associated values right here, right? Okay, so those are the big ones, right? And then URLSession, I sent out the link already. Cool, we good? So those are the topics we saw today. Those are the new ones we saw today. Any other questions? We good? 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 Going once, going twice? Please ask. All right, thank you guys. We'll continue tomorrow and just present our jokes in a table view and segue, because we always want to see those. Prepare for segue, we might still be rusty there. We always have to keep our development skills up to par with that. I could. Okay, cool. So maybe tomorrow we use a different way to segue. We'll use this index add. That's me. When you like something, I go the other way. All right, thank you. We're going to end here.